What's up, crew? Welcome to Filming in Progress, the show that takes you backstage into the world of local businesses and the people who make them shine. Joining us today is Dr. Murray Heber, a decorated athlete and Olympic team chiropractor who is leading the charge in optimizing human performance. Murray, thanks so much for being here.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Where are we?
We're at a bike shop called the Wheelhouse. So essentially, it's almost like a private membership-based clubhouse for cyclists. So nice, boutique, bougie, high-end bikes, all Italian. So coffee shop and everything all tied into it, and it's just a nice community, nice home. I used to do a lot of work out of here, and on the performance side of cycling. So I thought it'd be a great spot for having this podcast.
It really is. I mean, we got bikes behind you. We had some great coffee when we showed up, so I'm excited to be here. Tell me about flow state. What is it?
Flow state, it's a scientifically proven, neurological or neurobiological state. Most people have experienced it in their lifetime. It's kind of when you go and you get into the zone. So all of a sudden, you sort of lose track of time and everything sort of fades off. Your attention is on whatever it is, the task that you're doing there. Everything sort of just blends out and you just have your pure attention on what you're doing. It can be as simple as like a micro flow state where all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, that was just sort of really good. Like time flew by when you're catching up with friends. To these massive ones where all of a sudden you can go through them, you almost foresee into the future, you see things unraveling in front of you before they actually happen. So it exists on this spectrum, but really what it is like a neurological basis where there's a neurochemical sort of cocktail that takes place in the brain. So the right amounts of different neurochemicals will sort of create this environment for the brain to operate at its best, and also that correlates with a brainwave state. And so the brainwave state getting into an alpha theta, which we can talk about later on, but it's basically that's the calm focus state where it's like you're not busy, you're not overthinking, but you're just right there, you're calm and you're hyper focused on what you're doing in a positive way.
So cool. How did you first come across the concept and what intrigued you about it?
Well, I've always been working with trying to find peak performances for athletes. And so part of my background, my history started off in strength and conditioning, trying to build a bigger, stronger, more resilient athlete. And that gets you part of the way. But then all of a sudden there was lack of access to all of their strength and all their range of motion they could do. So then I got into manual therapy to be able to unlock those ranges and get the right muscles firing in the right pattern and right sequencing. And then so that got you somewhat to the next level, but then they could perform really well sometimes, but then not others. And I was like, okay, well, what's driving that now? And it's like, okay, well, we get into now, sort of what's going on in through here. And so a lot of times it's, I like to say, we get in our own way. So we start to overthink things. We put in our own, brakes as to our own performance expectations. So sometimes we don't, sometimes we do. And the other side of it actually was a big driver for it too, is you look at where do bad habits of movement come from. So no matter what athlete on the planet, doesn't matter how good they are at their sport, they still have bad habits. And they never seek to learn bad habits, but somehow they still get there. So that sort of sent me down this train of learning about the unconscious and how does that go through and program both everything from motor programming, but also to get out of our own way to enable peak performance. At will would be ideal to try and get to it. So I was sort of searching and researching down this rabbit hole of the unconscious. And then it was fortunate at that time, is at the Major League Strength and Conditioning baseball conferences. And I was talking there a little bit about my view on habits and both for learning, but also bad habits of movement. And then I was just talking to another fellow who was like, oh, hey, that's neat because I work a lot with habits and the unconscious as well. And he happened to be a retired Navy SEAL and does a lot of work with sport performance. And he said that's part of what their training was in this unconscious. And he said that unlocks something that's called flow states. I was like, what are flow states? And so that's where I got introduced to that side of it. So that set me off on that trajectory as to digging into now this flow state, sort of concept.
So cool. And you've since kind of expanded that concept beyond athletes, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically a flow state is when, to oversimplify, it's actually like when we feel our best and perform our best. It doesn't matter what it is you're doing. You could be writing an email, you could be playing a sport, you could be hanging out with your kids. Doesn't matter what it is, but when you're in that zone, you feel your best, you perform your best. That's like the peak human experience. And that's actually what started the whole research into flow. Was a fellow named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and he was actually on a quest to figure out what is happiness. Who are the happiest people in the world, and what really is that? How can we define that? And so he's going around to some of the world leaders and the world beaters doing all different, across different industries. And what they were describing was these states when they felt their best, it was like one thing flowed from one to the next. My thoughts flowed from one to the next. So this word flow kept coming back up. And that's where the term flow comes from. So really it was the pursuit to try and understand happiness, where we discovered these ideas of flow states. So that's where it's you feel your best and you also perform your best. So that's a neat sort of piece about it. So if you can go through and chase flow, you're also, as a result, going to be very happy.
Interesting. That's so interesting that it went about that way, where it was happiness first into flow rather than like flow results in happiness.
Yeah.
So would the opposite also be true then? If you're not in the state of flow, then you're more likely to be unhappy?
Yeah, maybe not necessarily more likely to be unhappy, but they're starting to now with a lot more like neuroimaging, they're finding that those who do have depression or chronic depression, now their brainwave state, they're in a high beta, so they're not getting into this alpha theta, which is associated with flow states. So they're finding that those who aren't happy, who are depressed, who are, I guess, sort of in that state where they're seeking happiness, they're not experiencing flow, and then the happiest people seem to be those who have a high flow lifestyle. So yeah, so there definitely is, I guess, sort of a inverse correlation as to more flow, more happiness, less flow, less happiness. Cause effect, don't know, but yeah. So flow can be one of those things to seek to be able to go through their end, and now be looking at as being a way to not necessarily treat, but to manage and to try and carve out some of those I guess sort of feel better moments throughout life.
Yeah, awesome. So how do you go about, obviously it can be kind of trained or learned or, practiced, I suppose. How does one go about, putting themselves into that flow state or putting themselves in the most likely place to be able to achieve that?
Right, so that's a great question, because then now with the advancement of neurosciences, they've been able to find that there are, sort of pre-existing conditions which are, very beneficial for flow taking place. And there's also what we call flow triggers. So these are triggers that will go through and help to bump you in closer and closer towards either whether it's a micro or a macro flow state. And the first thing though is that flow follows focus. So if you're not focused, then you're not going to find flow. So it really is trying to go through and find some of these triggers to help get your attention onto the right here, right now, and then sort of utilizing these triggers and sort of almost like putting them in front of you to be able to go through then to sort of knock on one onto the next and the next, and it is like a waterfall starting to sort of gaining momentum as it goes along, and then you just sort of get immersed in this zone that enables for a flow state to take place.
Awesome. What are some of the results that you've seen since you started practicing this and working in this field, whether it be with athletes that you've worked with or otherwise?
Some of the results, the science goes through and shows that, you can have learning rates that are, 300% and learning retention up to 500%, performance boosts up to 500%. So this is what the research and the science is going out there improving. And in like the practical experience, it would definitely line up with that. It's pretty remarkable, especially when it's stacked over time. So some of the athletes I work with, if we get into them like from their cohort, then at the beginning of a season, they've been progressing along at whatever rate, then all of a sudden start to do this work, and then they just accelerate off the charts compared to now their cohorts where they were. So it really gets to be as powerful. So you look at it and you go back over time, it's like, oh yeah, that is definitely, a 3x return on learning and learning retention, which then just sort of builds to the next practice, to the next game, and moves through it. Also, especially dealing with a lot of like youth development athletes, is things like confidence skyrockets, motivation just goes through the roof. Because again, if you can find flow, well then you're happy, you're driven, you perform at your best, and confidence just shows up.
Awesome. You were talking about how flow follows focus, and it sounds like a simple concept, but I feel like it's so much harder in reality, especially these days, right? Because there's so much stimulation these days, and you were talking about youth athletes and that sort of thing too. We live in an era where there's constant stimulation, whether it be the advertising on the street or your phone buzzing constantly or whatever the case may be. Do those things affect the work that you do? And like, is it a consideration that maybe it would have been easier, back in the day when there's less kind of constant stimulation to get into this flow state or get into this focus?
Yeah, I guess one of the things would have to be like when they're trying to go through and do it leading into practice or game time, whenever they want to try and get into flow state, is not having the distractions present. So that's one of the mechanics is controlling your environment as best as you can to minimize those distractions. A few other things too is depending on what's going on in that day, when you're going to go through your training or your practice or game prep, is what we call cognitive load. So that is basically all the stuff you've been carrying with you that's sort of just percolating in the back of your mind all day long. So as the day goes, it accumulates. And so that can sort of sit there and just keep you in a bit of a busy brain and overthinking, which can block you from getting your attention onto the task at hand. So it's how to go through and manage those concepts of the environment, but also dump the things that are sort of normal. So cognitive load would be in existence from the beginning of time, but it's a matter of trying to how to go through and do that. And that's where some of those flow triggers happen to kick in. Because if you, the way I try and describe it is you got to try and find this focus for free. Because otherwise, if you try and think about focusing, well, now you're thinking about thinking. So that actually just brings you up into here more. You're not actually just present. So it is a bit of a tricky one. But if you think about I like to use curiosity as one of those big triggers, because if you get curious about something, then all of a sudden there's no effort for you wanting to dig into it and learn more and just sort of go after it. So if you can go through there, and if it's a youth athlete or an entrepreneur, it's like, get curious about what can you do today? How could you drive this differently? What other solution could there be out there? So yeah, just get that working. All of a sudden your brain just gets right there on the spot. Other ones, especially a bit easier in sport, is risk. If you think about something, if there's a big risk in front of you, nothing else matters. Your attention is right there. So you can go through there. It doesn't have to be, big, huge, crazy physical risks, but it's sort of, putting the calculated risk in front of you that's going to know it and just go and drive your attention right there onto the spot. So those are ones you can do that. It doesn't have to be, again, a physical risk. If you are naturally a quiet person at the office and you don't want to go through and speak up at a board meeting even though you have a good idea, well, you can take that risk and actually go through and just sort of, try and speak up. So those big things are going to help go through and drive your attention to that focus point right there and then. And the other one that I like to lean into is going to get into, like for flow, there's what's called this challenge skill sweet spot. So if there's a challenge and your skill lines up with it, that's where we're going to go through and we're going to show up at our best. If the challenge is too high for our skill, it almost kicks us into anxiety and our body unconsciously doesn't really want to show up. It's like, oh boy, this is too much. And on the other side of it too, if our skill level is really high and all of a sudden the challenge is perceived to be very low, well then it's not going to really stimulate us, we're not going to really show up at our best. So those things are unconsciously driven. When you're aware of it, you can try and tilt that to that nice sort of spectrum where that challenge and skill will align with the enabling you to get into that peak performance. But same thing when that challenge is there and then there's a risk in front of you and you can use curiosity. Is putting some of those in front of you will really help to get your focus onto the present moment.
So cool. It sounds like is there any correlation with meditation or anything like that? Because it sounds like it's really about controlling your mental and you're being in charge of your thoughts and being able to identify, I like this, I don't like this, I'm going to continue this way. Is there any kind of correlation?
Yeah, there's a lot there actually. So that's a very loaded one. We can probably go on for a long time around it. So yeah, it has been shown that you go through and you do some meditation, you can actually, you get down into this alpha theta brainwave state. So the more you practice that, the easier it is for you to go and get your brainwaves into that state as well. So there definitely is a positive correlation between that. Some of the things that are a bit different though are going to be when you want to try and go through there, and now some of the form like the neurochemical standpoint is like the actual act of execution. So some people can be really good at getting to this calm focus state, but as soon as they have to go and get up and get moving, it kind of all disintegrates. So that can be used as a very powerful tool to help if you have a lot of cognitive load, how to go through and dump it ahead of time. Or actually after practice, after game times, after you've been through a bit of a flow state or something heavy, to go and do that to now calm everything down so you can actually get back into now learning the results of what just took place. So those are really good tools to sort of bookend a lot of it with, but using that and still learning how to go and drop some of these sort of more physical flow triggers or active flow triggers, whether it's, again, if you're just in the office, how do you go through there and stimulate those flow triggers versus an athlete out on the ice or the golf course, wherever it might be.
You're talking about these triggers, and I think that's really fascinating. And I bet you there's so many people that are listening to this that are like, oh, I'm constantly overloaded, like cognitive load, like you mentioned, and just can't find myself getting into that state where I can just kind of execute to the best of my ability. What are some of those those triggers that people can focus on or think about when they're overwhelmed or are trying to get into flow state?
The one I lean on the most and have had the most success with is actually just curiosity. Yeah, it seems easy enough that you can go through and just jump into, get curious about something, some aspect of, especially if it does relate to, the work, the task that you're trying to go through there and do, and especially your role, your performance in it, like a new way to solve a problem, something new you want to go through there and try, then that does help a lot to sort of just cut a lot of the cognitive load out of it. By no means is it always like a guaranteed, part to get you there, but I've had a lot of success with using curiosity as a sort of a springboard to get into that. And even if you're just maxed out with work or sport or whatever it might be, getting curious with something else that interests you. So I mean, if you're a car guy and you want to go through and see what the newest Lamborghini colors are going to be coming out with, just spend some time doing that, because it's going to go and quiet the brain down. It's going to dump a lot of that cognitive load for you, and then you can use that to actually bounce you into like a fresh mind. Okay, now I can go and come into this, but use it intentionally so that you can go and have it. Otherwise, it can just be a distraction that wasted time. But no, if you use it intentionally, you do that, then use that afterwards to go and bounce into, like, carry that mental state, that brainwave and neurochemical state into, I guess, sort of the task which you want to actually go and attack.
Awesome. So let's go backwards a little bit. How did you first find yourself in this position? I mean, you talked a little bit about how you came across the flow state idea, but what did you do before this?
Let's see. So we start right from like
as early as
way back when.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess now back to some of these flow triggers. I've naturally been a very curious person, especially as it gets into, the peak performance and what is the most that, I could do and accomplish. I was an athlete way back in a previous life. And it was injuries that always sort of kept me on the sidelines and eventually then took me out of sport. And I thought at the time I was always doing the right stuff, getting the right care, doing the right recovery, doing everything possible, but it still resulted in these injuries. And so I was like, okay, well, something's not adding up in through there. So I got curious just naturally and wanted to go through and solve that. That's what led me into more of a strength and conditioning side of things. And we're talking back when I was doing sport, it was like, squat more, like just lift heavy stuff. And now it's a totally different game, but that's what I was looking for, was like more of this sort of well-rounded athlete with, more joint control, with having high mobility, range of motion, but the stability and the explosiveness behind it. So what builds the athletes we're building today? So that's where the first sort of part that I got into. But then as I was going through and doing that, you can go through and actually build these really strong and resilient athletes, but then still you watch them move and it's like, oh yeah, but they're not accessing all this strength. So something like you can have a 1,000-watt light bulb, but if the current is only 100 watts going to it, then that's all you're going to get out of it. It's like, so how do we tinker with that now to get the most out of what has been built all the time? And so that's why I found there are some mechanical blocks, or even like nervous system control, motor programming. And so that got me into now more like the manual therapy side of things. So I would call it like a performance manual therapist. So that would be using everything from like acupuncture needles to now work with nervous system, but also unlocking joints, stimulating muscles, relieving any blocks or fibrous adhesions of muscles so they have the blood flow, have the capacity to operate at their best. And so that was a really good thing to be able to bolt on to a lot of the strength and conditioning background. But then I still got to the point where some days the athlete would perform at their best and other days they wouldn't. And it wasn't from any of those other aspects not being in check. Then all of a sudden got into like, okay, sometimes they just sort of showed up and they were there and they were on point. Other days they just, couldn't, for however hard they try, no matter how many Red Bulls they crushed, they couldn't, get their focus. So that's what started now getting, okay, well, what controls that sort of drive? What is the unconscious doing sometimes where it shows up and it, turns a challenge into the best performance ever, where other times it turns a challenge into the body just doesn't even show up, for the match, for the game, or whatever it might be. And so that's what started me down this I guess sort of the unconscious, the neuroscience of peak performance. And that's what resulted into where I am now.
Awesome. How long have you been doing this?
On the flow state side of things, more now, I guess, sort of getting heavily into for that probably last like 4 or 5 years. Started looking into it now about like 8-9 years ago. But there's been a lot of science that's developed over that time to really help, explain to you to get deeper into it. But yeah, that's been sort of, building up since, I guess it would have been 2016 the first time, 2015, 16 the first time I heard about it. So yeah, close to 10 years on that side. But overall, like chasing peak performance in like both myself and athletes, working with them since, I guess probably 20 some years now. So yeah, it's been a long time always sort of chasing whatever that optimal can be, which in a way, and as that's why I like working with athletes and entrepreneurs, is that there is no finish line. It's an ongoing race. There's no ceiling effect to this. Okay, now you're as big and strong and fast and agile as you possibly can be. It's like, no, there's always more. There's always the next level. It gets to a law of diminishing returns, but that's all right. It still is progress to be made. It's the true definition of like a growth mindset. And that is, fantastic to work with. And entrepreneurs too, it's always, where can this go? What is next? How do I build this? How do I, elaborate this? How do we pivot to now a new market environment? So there's always something on the go. And so it's one of the best groups to be able to go through and work with.
Do you find that you mentioned growth mindset there, and I feel like that's a commonality for sure among entrepreneurs, and I imagine among top athletes and that sort of thing as well. Is that, do you find that's a common thread between everybody that you work with?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was always saying, like, has to be some kind of a performance expectation from the people I work with. Yeah, again, whether it's entrepreneur or athletes. And a lot of that actually does stem back down to, it's got to be a growth mindset, because then they're expecting some level of increased performance. They want to do better. They want to improve. They're not happy with sort of the status quo. They always want to do more. They can be happy with where they're at, but they're always trying to strive to do more, to learn more, to perform better. So yeah, there's definitely sort of like a natural pull that just brings us together, and we work really well together.
Do you ever find any resistance to this sort of work? So for example, coming in, like you said, about 10 years ago when you first became interested and you were already working in the performance space, but then integrating this flow side of things as well, was there ever any resistance by anybody that you're working with to integrate this? Or has it always been kind of like, yes, absolutely, that sounds interesting, let's go?
Not necessarily resistance. I guess more sort of questions and need for understanding. Because again, pretty new concept, put it out there. But again, dealing with any athletes or entrepreneurs, they say, oh yeah, it's when you're in the zone. You can do. Everyone's like, oh yeah, okay, I remember. So it's like, that's what we're trying to learn how to access. So they're like, okay, I got it, cool. But they're like, it's so random and so just sort of sparse usually, that's like trying to predict where lightning is going to strike, and it's like, nah, you can't do that. But no, actually you can. You may not be able to predict where it's going to strike, but you can go and create the storm, the environment where it's going to be really ripe for it to get really close to it. So that was sort of, I guess, sort of bridging that chasm was sort of the biggest bit for onboarding, because everybody knows what that flow state is. Everybody's experienced it, and everybody would like to have more of it. But it's like, oh yeah, it seems so far that it's just random. It's like, oh yeah, it was just a one-off. The stars have to align and everything has to take place for it to take place. So it's actually, getting them to know that, no, it is a process. You can go through there and do this. There are steps to it. There are these flow triggers. So yeah, that was sort of the biggest pushback or not necessarily pushback, but I guess sort of, bit to getting onboarding. A lot of the other questions I always had too was like, so is this it's like sports psychology or mental health or mental performance training? And I like to try and be really clear on that. It's like, no, what I work with is not about, thinking or emotions or, that side of it. It's all just about like the neurochemicals and the brainwave states that allow for peak performance and what to do to get into those. That's what we mentioned earlier. If you get into a flow state, you feel really good. So like there are these knock-on carryover effects to it, but it's not what I sort of go in and say that I'm working on for mental performance or sports psychology. That's it. I leave that to those professionals. These actually work very well together. They sort of saddle up really nicely. They're very complementary. But yeah, there's still different aspects of it.
Yeah, cool. When somebody has kind of experienced these triggers and maybe they're familiar with how to get into the flow state, or at least how it pertains to them individually, what happens after that? Are they, is there active training required or active practice required for them to continue to be able to access that state, or are they kind of done? They move on and they're good forever.
Yeah, interesting. It is a skill that is always progressing. So it's like any other skill. The more you do it, the more you practice it, then the better you get. You might go, and if it's like learning how to be a better golfer, then yeah, first you have lessons that go through, and you get more as you do at the beginning, but then near the end you got to refine it more just to get that law of diminishing returns. But yeah, it's never something where you get there to that finish line like, oh, got it, perfect. No, it can always be better, always be working more at it and more towards it, and learning more. Your flow triggers are going to sort of move and shift, which are the more powerful ones based on different, I guess, environment, different stimulus, different goals or outcomes that could be presented to you. So yeah, so it is a moving sort of target sometimes. That is a matter of, it always helps to have it. The dependency upon it does definitely drop off when you get some level of self-sufficiency. But yeah, it always helps to have a coach as you go along to sort of check in with and keep it going.
Like anything, really.
Yeah, exactly. Like anything. Yeah, for sure. You got it.
What does the competitive landscape look like? I'm using those terms loosely because I imagine it's probably a small field of study where you probably collaborate with a lot of people that are looking into the similar thing. But what does that look like? Are there other people doing what you do?
Yeah, there definitely are. Again, it is a fairly new field that's coming up. So the competitive landscape, I think actually now I at least feel that it's still pretty cooperative, because the one issue with this is that because it is new, nobody's really searching for it or seeking it really right now. It has to sort of be presented like, oh wow, that's the solution I've been looking for, but we don't know what we don't know. And so the more we actually work together or at least be friendly, then we're not in direct competition with each other for most things. It's not as though there's a high density right in the immediate area. Then it actually helps to spread the story, spread the word, and just make it more of a well-known topic, so that actually now we can all benefit from this new neuroscience, I guess sort of research development to how it actually supports peak performances.
It's really interesting. You mentioned golf there, and I mean, we're just coming out of the Masters weekend, which is pretty interesting. And I feel like golf is one of those sports where, and maybe this is just biased because I watch golf, but there's so much variation in how a player performs from weekend to weekend or whatever the case may be. And there's got to be, maybe it comes down to nerve. It could be any culmination of things, really. But that's got to be a really great example for you to use when you're talking about flow state, right? Because sometimes people have it and sometimes they don't, and it's everyone on the PGA Tour is capable of hitting a great shot, but whether they do or not is a different story.
Right.
Yeah.
And actually, it's one of the great spots where you got to watch flow state in action. And one of the best actually was looking at Tiger Woods back when he first came on. Because he was just hitting he was redefining golf. It wasn't just a good player. He was doing amazing shots and like one after another. And it was like, who is this kid? How is he doing this? And if we look at a lot of the flow triggers that he's experiencing, is that now he's fresh onto the tour. So there's it's new for him. So this novelty is a big flow trigger. And there's also a big challenge. He wanted to go through there and showcase himself. So he had clear goals as to what he wanted to go through into. He's taking risks. So all these things are massive flow triggers. These drive the dopamine, the norepinephrine, which drives the focus. Whereas he gets to the point where he just can do no wrong, because he exactly if I hit this. Like, it just is another level of control. His club becomes part of him. It's not him holding a club. It's like, no, it's just like there's not even a question in his mind as to where it would go and what the outcome would be. It'd be more unusual for it to be a bad shot than to have that perfect, unbelievable shot to actually take place. So that's where you have to go and watch flow states in action. And then, you see the other side of it when somebody goes and gets into their head. They get overthinking. That's where they sort of fall apart. They just break down. They can't hit that shot. They can't sink that putt to save their life. And that's what happens when we get into our brain and get overthinking. That's a bit more of a side one in terms of like what happens in the brain during a flow state that we can sort of circle back to. But to get back to the golf, golf is a fantastic one to see it in action. And whoever's golf has already knows this too, where it's like, sometimes you can go through there and have the best lie. This is me anyways. I can have a great lie. I'm like, oh, this should be a really easy shot. Just do this, and I'll find a way to screw it up. And meanwhile, I'm off in the tree somewhere, and I was like, well, this is kind of what I want to go through there and do, but I have no expectation coming out of it, and it's a perfect shot. So it's like, right, how come? So it's like, that's me. I'm not a great golfer, but that's where it just sort of lies into it. It's like the weight we put onto ourselves, our expectations of it, like sort of how we get overthinking about it versus, I'm not really thinking I'm just going to go and take this shot, and it turns out really good. So it's this neat thing you get to play with. And I know the other side of it too. I like to work with a lot of players, and both even from like whether it's hockey players or golfers. So many have these questions, which is like, so how come like if I go through and have a couple of beers or a couple of drinks, I play better? And part of that is because, well, it actually slows your thinking brain down. It doesn't show up the same if you've gone through and had one or two drinks beforehand. It just kind of quiets it down. If you have too many, then you're going to play terribly. But not a strategy to utilize, but explains actually what's going on inside of the brain. And same thing for some hockey players. They'll say like, oh yeah, one of the best games I ever played was actually after like a party the night prior, where they're up until 5 a.m. They can barely even lace their skates up, and they're showing up there, and all of a sudden they go and they get a hat trick. And it's like, how is that possible? And it's because the brain didn't show up; it's still cooked. So they just rely on execution. And they're professional. They've been playing so many times. So again, not a strategy to utilize, and probably more often than not, they play like crap versus have the hat trick. But that sort of is what takes place in the brain, is where you got to get out of your own way and just execute. And so that's what happens in those situations. Again, don't recommend it, but I think a lot of people have had those experiences and have that as a question like, so how did this happen? And that's why.
Yeah. Really cool. Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's so many similarities between just like being able to control your mental is one of the biggest things here. What is one of the biggest challenges that you face in trying to do the work that you do? Maybe in finding the right customers or clients, or is it communicating kind of what that ideal state looks like? Or
it's actually just awareness is the biggest piece. Yeah, so it's actually sort of getting the story out, the awareness out to individuals. So again, they see this solution now also gets presented. It's like, oh, okay, like this would be really good. Usually we default into our mechanics. So we get into our thinking brain. It's like for an athlete, it's like, oh, do more training, do more of this. It's like, it's just like train harder, train harder, train harder. That's usually what sort of drives us. Same thing with entrepreneurs, like just grind, do more, embrace the suck, like just keep going. Doesn't matter if you're moving like a turtle's pace. But it's like just keep embracing the suck and grinding through it. So that's what usually we default and we lean onto. And a lot of times you can go through there and have this other side of you can get into a flow state. Then if you're 5 times more productive, it's like, wow, that is a really cool solution to the problem. But we don't look for it. We just think, okay, what's the next thing we can sort of put in here to help the grind out or to solve the problem in the grind. So it's not looking at how do we get this thing functioning at its best. So that's where if you become aware of it, then it really helps out because it's not a natural thing we're sort of triggered to look for or to lean onto.
Right. That awareness side of things, is that what started you down the journey of wanting to tell that story via a documentary?
100%, yeah, absolutely. It definitely is. Because I was always, again, having the same conversation with a lot of people. I was like, man, I want to be able to go through there and take this and reach a large audience with it. And that's where I was fortunate enough to one of my former athletes I was working with owned a production company. So we got talking, and then this flow documentary sort of spun off from that. And so we wanted to go through there and look into all these different aspects of flow. And part of the history of flow were some of the beginning of the research came up with, especially a lot with Stephen Kotler, was looking at all these sort of more like adventure athletes or extreme athletes that do the crazy snowboarding, wingsuit flying, all of these things. And like if you looked at their progression from in the 90s onwards, it grew at this sort of exponential rate. So like this 5-time return on performance that normal if it was ski racing, it's just fastest person from the top of the hill to the bottom. That's just sort of linear. You can get a little bit better, like marginally better with equipment or technique, speed, skill, what have you. But the rate that all of these other sports were going up at was following this exponential curve. And so that's where I started looking at, okay, well, what's new, what's different with this? And that's where these things started to sort of catapult together. Yeah, so that was where a lot of the early storytelling of flow states came from. And there's still, when I'm talking to people, they still think it's only for extreme athletes to find it, but no, it's actually for anybody. It's for the accountant, it's for anyone out there. And so to tell this story, I wanted to be able to go through that and tell it from these extreme athletes. We have some of these extreme athletes, these big wave surfers and wingsuit flying individuals, all the way down actually to music for treating trauma. Because you can go through there, music is a great flow trigger to go through and just get you into that zone. But then how these people who've had, whether it's from tactical experiences, that they're left with a PTSD type of thing, how they actually go and move through this and find their way through it by finding flow. So it tells that whole broad story. But yeah, that's what I wanted to do with it, was to tell the story, the broad story of flow, and also be able to deliver it to the largest audience possible.
Awesome. Yeah, I can't imagine anybody wouldn't. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to see the trailer, and I'm super excited for the documentary to come out.
Yeah. So hopefully it should be kind of wrapping up here in the next, probably a few months, and then then up for distribution. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing it all wrapped up and on TV.
Awesome. Is it hard for people to see, because obviously we've talked a lot about athletes and you talked about the musician case study there as well, but relating it to business and that sort of thing, is it hard for people to envision the flow state in avenues where it's not directly visualizable, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it is. Mainly because we still sort of see it as a physical performance outcome, not on paper performance. And sometimes actually go through it, and it's hard to measure that in businesses or in corporations, like especially on a short timeline. Whereas if you go through there and you're trying to do some crazy jump on a snowboard, you land it or you don't, you get into the zone or you don't. You can feel that, but in business it's a little bit different. It's not as easy to sort of feel or experience. So it does take a little bit more of that, that leap of faith or that trust that it works out. But some really good examples of, again, these flow triggers that have been utilized, and this is actually even before they understood the science of it. Like, this is one thing I love about high performers, is that a lot of high performers just naturally find flow without knowing what it is. It's just sort of they came across it and they just find ways to get themselves there more often than not. And one company that was doing this is 3M. So they have what's called 15% time. So their employees can go through there and for 15% of the time, go through there and work on whatever interests them or they're curious about or whatever they want to go through and explore. And so that now has Two huge flow triggers associated with that right away is there's curiosity and there's autonomy. And so that goes through there and helps to get them just sort of thinking outside of the box. And that's where things like Post-it notes came from. So a lot of innovations, a lot of new ideas sort of popped out of that. Google does the same thing. They have 20% time, but exact sort of same concept. And that's where Gmail and Google Earth and so many of their products that we think of Google now, that's where they all came from. So this side of leveraging curiosity and autonomy is where these things can build out from. But it's hard to see it in like the right here, right now experience as what a physical experience of flow would be.
Right. And I imagine that's because, the contrasting the athletes with business people, for example, there's a tangible outcome with athletes. What that, even though there's a moving target line, like we discussed earlier, what that outcome is that you're seeking. Whereas business, you don't really know. You might be able to look back and be like, yes, that was flow for sure. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the big things actually for flow, but also from like the retention of learning, is the immediate feedback loop. So the tighter the feedback loop can be, then the faster you're going to learn and progress through it. So in sport, it's like you go and try and do a jump, you landed it, you didn't. You made a mistake, you didn't. You know automatically where you can improve from. And I could actually go back to the golf example, would be as if you're learning how to golf and you go out to a driving range and it's middle of the night, it's pitch black out there, you hit a bucket of balls, and you go back a week later and you look where they all landed. Okay, that night you go back out, you hit a bucket of balls. Like, how long will it take for you to go through and improve? Because your feedback loop is huge. You have no idea really between the time that passed, what you have to do to improve that shot. Whereas what really happens is you're out there, you hit the ball, you see what happens, you make micro adjustments, and you keep doing that. So your feedback loop is tighter. Well, what happens in business is that we don't create the feedback loop, or the feedback loop is really long. It's next quarter when we do our review. So again, we lose what did I do just right now that's affected that. It's like, well, I don't know, you lose it. So if you can go in whatever area of business or entrepreneurship that you're trying to go through and do and build, is tighten up that feedback loop, then you can actually start to experience, flow more in the right here, right now, and sort of see its progress and the power that it can have. But yeah, it's better, you got to take some time and actually intentionally set, what does that target look like? What is that feedback loop that I'm trying to get out of?
That's awesome. I really love that. Translating that into a shorter time frame so that you can actually measure results right away and make adjustments as necessary.
Yeah, because otherwise it just sort of carries on forever, and if we don't set those check-in points, then we don't really know if we're staying on target or how far we drift off before we got to come back. So yeah, it is important to tighten up the feedback loop as tight as possible.
Awesome. So you talked a little bit about those teams like Google and 3M, but how does this apply to teams in general? Like, is it a different approach when you're working with teams versus individuals?
Actually, great question, because whether there's teams in sport or teams in corporate world, they behave very similarly, and it really is based off of getting a team into flow is very similar. The triggers are almost the same, but it has to be now shared by the group. So as you have shared goals, you take shared risks. You have the shared sort of desired outcomes. So these are all part of what creates everybody to go through and get to this group flow or team flow. If one person is totally off and they don't want to get into it, that can actually dismantle the entire system. So it can just sort of you get rid of the bad apple, and all of a sudden everything starts to go through and improve. So that's really sort of the same idea as getting an individual into it, but now you got to apply it to the team and get them all there together. So the more they can sort of work cohesively to now set those, again, almost like community goals and risks they want to go through and take, and then the process of how they want to go and get there, then they're all bought in, they all show up. And so they're still all having their own individual autonomy within the group, within the team, so they feel empowered to go through and do this. And the other really positive thing when they can get into team flow, well, the same as individual flow, is you feel good. So they are the most engaged, employees or teams. They're always going to be the highest performing teams out there, is when they can go and get into flow. And that's where you have, for a lot of what we're doing now, where you hear about, corporate culture and how do we go and, shift this. It's not more money and it's not more paid vacations, and those things might have a little bit of a blip on the radar for it. But really, it's actually giving the autonomy to the individuals. So they can actually go through and feel that engagement, feel that they have some level of control of steering the ship. But also, if they don't know what their, I guess that goal or direction of their role in the job, or they don't have a chance to create it themselves, then it's, you're out there and, well, where am I going? Right? So it's hard to be able to go through there and just, execute on a daily basis. After a little while, it's like, why am I doing this? Like, there's only so much money or whatever they can throw at somebody to sort of keep them showing up, but then they're not really going to be that engaged or that I guess sort of, yeah, like, happy or present. So yeah, so it is like flow is a massively powerful thing for organizations to get teams into flow, individuals into flow for the best performance, but also is the changing the culture so that everybody's as engaged as possible.
That's awesome. And I imagine when you're working with teams, that sort of thing, people probably, if they're not open to the idea or they don't want to improve for whatever reason, they would probably self-identify out, right? Like is that something that you see very often?
Yeah, it's interesting because some people are just unaware of what they're unaware of, and they just naturally want to go through and either give pushback or don't see it, believe it, or what have you. So there are some of those that aren't actively going against the grain, but some that's sort of just how they operate. And they can sort of either tip one way or the other, and it takes a little bit either more time to have a little bit more of that buy-in versus where they don't have the buy-in and they go through and make their way to sort of self-select out. But yeah, it is usually a pretty good filter. And again, that comes back down to growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And those who have growth mindset, then they all sort of seem to just cluster together because where can we go with this? What is possible? And those who have that fixed mindset is just sort of stuck and that's it. Then they'll rarely go through and find that group flow because they just don't fit with that growth component.
Awesome. So what does an engagement with you typically look like? If I was maybe let's look at it from a couple different scenarios. So if I was, a team lead and I wanted you to work with my team to help us find flow, or maybe I'm an athlete, or maybe I'm just a CEO that wants some coaching on, how can I access this state? What does that typically look like?
Basically, I have like three different ways of engagement. One is we get really in depth, so it's all one-on-one, and again, the tightest feedback loop as possible. So especially at the beginning, we're in contact, every day, and also be able to go through them, whether it's through text messages or emails, to sort of really go through and get that feedback loop going, so we can move through this as fast as possible. So that sort of is like the highest, most intense format of it. And then other ones we can take that same thing, just now scale it down a little bit more so the feedback loop can be a bit more stretched. But it's like, on a weekly basis of engagement, we go through there and take part with that. And then all the way back down to just more intensive like sprints or courses, where those online, they're more group courses where you can go through, you can have, whether it's your entire team on board, to teach a lot of these mechanics to it, and like the stepwise, almost like a formula to go and do and to follow to get you into that environment. And that's what a lot of people are looking for. They're like, hey, I want to go through and take it from there. So those are the other options through there. So basically it's like the intensive one-on-one, still one-on-one or small group engagement, and then to the online programs and courses.
Awesome. So it's customizable basically to an extent, obviously, but depending on kind of what that individual or client would be looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And lots of times it can come down to going through and doing a sprint with a group or a team, and then the sort of team, the manager or the lead for the team, then I go through and carry on the one-on-one with that, because now they're acting as the flow coach for their team. But to get them all on the same page to begin with, they all take the course to be able to go through there now. Okay, that now sets the baseline, and it is now trying to get the one person to help navigate everybody through. But then they can go through and now take that down the chain as they keep on going. So yeah, it is about the education, the empowerment is huge, is very important across all of those platforms. But then after that, it's a matter of like how much actual engagement for the continued learning and the application, the practical side of it, and like sort of the carry-on growth side of it is where we just sort of get into more depth and more frequency.
Right. So probably like a heavy learning up front, and then it's maintenance after that kind of thing.
Yeah, you got it. And the same thing for like a sport team as well. It's like if everybody on that, they can go through and get on the same page, then someone like whether it's the captain or the head of what have you, whatever line it might be, then they go through there and they can take a bit more in depth, because they can sort of now go through and the neat thing with some of these things with flow is that sometimes actually the players, the individuals don't need to know anything about it, but if all these things are dropped in front of them, then all of a sudden it just starts to boost performance all across the board. So that's sometimes where too, so it's like, if they have the base level of education, helps out with it, then they're bought into it. But then if all of a sudden just the way whether it's the manager or the team lead or captain just asks questions, if they ask a question in a certain way that sort of sparks somebody's curiosity, now they're doing all that work to go through and find the goals, to set the challenges. So that's a totally different approach than to say, here's the outcome I want, go through and execute. Because that's not going to have that engagement. So the way you get there makes all the difference for getting that engagement, that buy-in from the teams and everybody you're working with.
Cool. You're also working on an app that's obviously related. Tell me about that.
So that now is the idea to take what I'm doing in an analog format of like the one-on-one coaching, and actually now turn it into something that can be driven by AI, because AI is going to be so cool, so powerful. It can actually go through there, and now it can become the one that is out there to try and prompt you. So we go through and now teach AI how to go through there and help you set those clear goals, how to engage with you for creating the curiosity, the autonomy, and so getting it refined out to become that tool. Then all of a sudden it can go through and have, it now takes us again to a larger market because it's going to go through and just decrease the the heavy time load involved with it, the one-on-one. So it helps to just decrease cost and increase access. But also the neat thing with it is that it has a lot more ability to ping or be present because we always have our phones on us and around. But then also it can tie into other wearable tech. And that's what we're working on as well as a wearable technology. That would be EEG, so basically reading brainwave states, and then also be able to go through there and modify them too. So if you are stuck in overthinking, you can't get out of your own way, then this can actually go through, read that, work with the app itself, but also then modulate it down to actually get you out of that overthinking busy brain, help to dump some of that cognitive load. So we have the app that works on more or less the neurochemical trigger side of it, and then the wearable tech to actually help to bring the brainwaves in state to now really set that environment for finding flow as often as possible. Almost like the goal would be the flow on demand would be the optimal we're seeking.
Unreal. How two-part question, how far away are we from that? And secondly, what does that look like from like a wearable tech perspective that's reading your brainwaves to be able to kind of give you that live feedback?
Right now there's actually a lot of wearable tech that's reading brainwaves and how that interacts with apps. So like Muse is one example of it. That's quite well. They're tied into whether it's a like a meditation app. So basically going through and help to give you the prompts to get you into a deeper meditation. Other ones are going to be reading it and helping out for finding focus. When you drift away from focus based off your brainwaves, it's going to go through and prompt you to how to go and get back into it. So there's a lot out there that are already doing that. And they can be from a headband, they can be headphones. It's basically anything that goes through and has like now with these like they're fabric EEG sensors. So it's not like having those leads on the head with a jelly into them. And it's not like those anymore at all. It's really advanced. So they're getting implanted into a lot of different wearable devices. So it can be sort of any one of those aspects. And then the other side of it, in terms of how to actually go through there and now modulate with the brainwaves. Again, there's tons of different ways to be able to go through and do that. You can even just listen to music with the right sort of beat or structure, and it goes through there and helps to bring you down into this alpha theta brainwave state. So if we're looking at an alpha brainwave state, let's say it's around 10 hertz, so like 10 beats per second. Whatever you're perceiving through almost any of your sensory devices, whether it's tactile or visual, auditory, you name it, it's going to go through and actually pull into that state. The more you have, the stronger it's going to pull. But yeah, the brain just wants to go through and just sort of get into what it's being surrounded with. So that's where there's a multitude of different ways to accomplish it. It's just a matter of actually going through and have something that delivers it, reads it, talks to the device to actually have that full closed loop system.
Mm-hmm. So cool. How far away are we from this technology or your app or anything like that being released?
Basically all the technology, everything's all been out there, all done, all validated. Now it really is just going through the process of actually buttoning up into like our sort of rudimentary model we have right now, and then turning it into the end user consumer product. So how long that takes, I'd like to say it'd be a matter of like, it'll be ready in 6 months, but everything seems to take double or triple as long as possible. But yeah, we're hoping to make some really sort of fast headway in the next 6 months to sort of see where we can go and get to with that.
Amazing. We talked about triggers a little bit earlier, but I mean, now that we have a really good understanding of kind of what flow state looks like, I'm curious as to the average person listening that is curious, funny enough, to kind of access that state. What other triggers would you recommend off the bat, if I'm trying to access that state?
I guess it just sort of depends on like where you want to try and find it with. So something we didn't really hit a lot on, but it's going to be clear goals. So knowing exactly where you're going, and especially if they're sort of drop some that are short and right in front of you. So almost like your unconscious will know that you did it or you didn't do it. Not to go off on too far of a side tangent, but if we look at goal-directed behavior and how that works, it's actually one of my favorite little studies that was read about or done. It was almost found kind of by accident because they're working with electrodes into the brain of rats. And they sort of missed the mark, but all of a sudden they found these rats were behaving differently. So they started looking at it a bit differently and found that they hit this nucleus accumbens, which is where our goal-directed behavior lives. And so when they had these electrodes in there, they just hit a foot pedal, it releases dopamine as though they're working towards a certain goal. What they found was that these rats would sit there and just keep tapping this foot pedal all the time. They would actually forget to eat or drink water, so they would actually starve or die of thirst rather than stop hitting this pedal, because that's how strong that drive is from our goal-directed behavior. So that's where it is one of our most powerful drivers that we do have. So if we can go through there, we have we have goals in front of us, especially if we know that our unconscious, if we're taking a step towards it or not, we get rewarded with dopamine and norepinephrine to help say, that was great, do it again. So it's not about the outcome, whether you achieve the goal or not, it's that you attempted to go and get there. So you got to go through and set that goal. And if your goal is to go through and climb Mount Everest, that's great. But if again, now to challenge and skill, that's huge. You don't even have the ability to start. But if you said, okay, well, just to get there, you break it right down to what am I going to do today or right now that's going to get me one step closer to that? Well, that is this, it's magical. It's like a tailwind. It's this rocket fuel for you moving through these steps effortlessly. So it is like getting these crystal clear goals that your unconscious will know, yes, you try to get there or not, to create that fuel, and also feeling you have the autonomy to go after them. That's going to be great. Tie it in there with something that's either, whether it's a new or novel goal too. So if you climb Mount Everest 10 times, you're going to try an 11th. It's not going to be the same kind of driver for it. So find something new is going to be a big driver as well. So those are some of the early ones you can go through and just put in front of you right now to help sort of just spark that curiosity and that drive to feel like, oh yeah, that was really productive.
Awesome. I'm sure there's so many people that are just going to go try that right away, including myself.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah. What's exciting to you about the work that you do and keeps you kind of, obviously you're really passionate about what you do. What keeps you coming back to work on this every day?
Just seeing the results in people, and hearing the stories. Like if I'm working with youth athletes, is the parents and what they're saying, how the confidence in a kid, how they're showing up as a totally different human being than it was 6 months ago. So that's amazing. And working with entrepreneurs, that all of a sudden they're just sort of stuck in this, right? You can sort of see the weight, the burnout, the grind is just sort of weighing them down. You see, it looks like they're wearing a 1,000-pound wet blanket. And then all of a sudden you go through and after a bit of time working with this stuff, all of a sudden now they have balance, they have step, they have optimism, they can just sort of attack everything. They still have the same grind, but it is way faster, way more energetic, as opposed to this, I gotta suffer and do this. Like, no, I get to actually thrive and do this. So yeah, it's just sort of seeing those outcomes and those stories that come back. That is the most fulfilling thing for me in delivering what I do, and keeps me coming back every day. Plus, I get it. It's an endless learning side of it too, actually. So there's no end to it. So that fulfills me on that growth side, is always learning more. And since it's still relatively new in the sense of like the neuroscience investigation side of it, there's always going to be more and new things we'll be learning as it comes along. So yeah, there's going to be lots of growth left in this industry for sure.
Yeah, that was my next question, was where you get, how do these learnings come about, and where you kind of, like, I imagine as you're working with people, you're kind of observing different behaviors, different things, maybe different triggers, whatever the case may be, constantly. Is there like a network of professionals in this field that you kind of consult with, or any sort of publications, or what is that like what does that look like?
I guess not too cohesive. No, there are pods that are doing a lot of the right work. So some of the great leaders, whether it's Stephen Kotler or Jamie Wheel, a lot of them are doing, whether it's master classes or things that's where they're doing a lot of the research. So Flow Research Collective, they do a lot of work on flow and trying to just keep the science moving forward. So they're always a really good resource to, I guess, sort of get educated, but also sort of keep the understanding of what's sort of new and developing coming from somebody who's already curating the information. But other than that, it is a sort of, you're pounding through the research journals or wherever it looks like it's coming from. But for me, I like a lot more of the applied side of it, is actually the learning in real time. Because sometimes for developing the research studies, where you go through there and you develop something, you do the study, you validate it, there's a big lag time between when that actually goes and gets done and now gets published and then it lands in my lap, versus working with individuals and trying some of these sort of theories together and sort of seeing the results as it goes along. So I like to be on that side of it, this applied side, and actually delivering it and seeing in real time what's happening and what's changing. So that's a lot of my learning is the actual in-person learning, backed up with these other little pieces that I get to try and combine in new and unique ways to see the outcomes.
Yeah, sounds like the feedback loop of education publications is too long, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is. It's a long time. So that's where, like, for any athlete or business leader, entrepreneur, like, I look at it being like being world class versus being world leading. And if you're following all the best research, all the best proven techniques, everything else, that's world class. But to be world leading, you got to be doing new stuff. You got to be creating. You got to be carving the path out there, which is are all the high performing athletes. They're trying to go through and find new ways to go through and be the best. There's a lot that are world class, absolutely. But those who really want to rise above, they want to be world leading. And same thing for entrepreneurs. That's where they're going and driving towards it. So again, back to those are the people that sort of we find each other and we naturally mesh very well, because they're looking for those things. Okay, what is new? What is different? How do I now go through that and find a new path through these systems to see what is possible?
Yeah, we were talking about the idea of self-selection earlier regarding if maybe flow isn't for you, but I imagine it's kind of the same idea for you when choosing clients. Like if people are approaching you interested in this idea and wanting to consult you or be coached by you or whatever the case may be, it's a natural fit because they are looking for that performance.
Yeah. And I find so often we go through and have like a little discovery call or something that's, whether it's slotted to be 15 or 30 minutes, but then all of a sudden it's like an hour later and we got into a flow state, we're sort of all energized about it. It's like, yeah, that's where we know it's going to be a really great fit, because it's always one question, one curiosity, and the conversation just sort of goes and skyrockets. And yeah, so that's always the part of it, and that's more often than not what ends up happening. Because if somebody's curious enough to learn more and hop on a call, then it usually leads into the excitement to want to dig in deeper.
100%. That's where I'm at right now after just chatting for an hour. So, what does success look like to you?
Oh boy, great question. I guess where do we want to answer that one? That's a good one. So I guess on a few different levels. Like one level of success is actually taking these sides of the neuroscience of flow and actually now getting out to the masses. Because I can only talk and engage with so many people, but then whether it's through social media or through the documentary, hopefully go through and reach millions of people. And from one side of that's really driven a lot of this too. Like working with athletes and entrepreneurs for their peak performance has been a big part of it too, but also really sort of fulfilled a part of me as well, from both like business and being in the grind and finding burnout and finding this sort of empty, sort of almost like chasm where you just feel stuck and it's hard to go and get out of it. And you almost are aware that you're not getting the same enjoyment out of life. You're not motivated for a lot of other things that used to bring you happiness. It doesn't anymore. And it's like, how do you claw through this? And it's like, oh, you know what? Like finding flow states, which are things you can go and do and put in front of you. Then all of a sudden, it helps to actually, lift you up so you feel better, you perform better, you find that excitement, you find that engagement, you find that joie de vivre again. So be able to go through and find a lot of these people who are in these states of whether it's actually suffering from just sort of either whether it's depression or just sort of this overall just sort of lack of drive and motivation, and how to turn that around and get more people engaged back in their lives and their communities. So that would be like the ultimate sort of success would be having a big profound impact on more of a global scale in that regard. But that's like the BHAG that's way out there.
Love it. Yeah, I love the tie back to the happiness piece. Like that got me right at the beginning. If flow equals happiness, why wouldn't you want to? And plus increased performance, it's like
Who wouldn't want that? Right? Yeah, that's again where it comes down to the self-selection. There's very few people that would be like, I want to feel better and perform better. Nah, that's not for me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. We talked about the app and that sort of thing, but what else is coming down the pipeline? What's exciting? What are you working on?
Mostly it's still going to be, like a lot of time spent on, developing this app and the wearable tech piece to it. Then it is actually integrating more with, sports teams and also just, with entrepreneurs. So it's taking what I'm trying to go through and do and trying to scale it up a little bit more. So still having a lot of the one-on-one side of it, whether it's actually now onboarding and teaching, training some other people to be able to go through and deliver the services, so we can handle on more clients. Really it is to start to bring this as a concept into sports teams and organizations to be a differentiator for their performance. And same thing for entrepreneurs, because the burnout, the grind, it is real. A lot are suffering through it, and it doesn't need to be a suffer. They can have such a much better way through it without just sort of digging deeper and sacrificing your own personal self, your primary relationships, your whatever, or the business itself. So you don't have to sacrifice all those things or to the depth of it for success in business.
Right. Yeah. So that education piece, really just hitting the masses with what this is and how it can help you in your life.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that is it's trying to get the story out there to more avenues, to more people.
Awesome. Where can we, on that note, where can we send people to follow along what you're doing, the services that you have to offer, et cetera?
Well, right now, I actually started transitioning stuff over to a new website called The Flow Factory. So it's theflowfactory.ai is where it can be found right now. It's only sort of buttoned up for sports, but it's basically the exact same, contact me through there, but it's the exact same concept but now applied to sport, but then applied to entrepreneurs or professional athletes, whatever area you want to be able to go through and find flow, whoever does, then that's how we go through and track me down and keep in touch with it.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm sure after this conversation, there's going to be plenty of people that are just keen to learn more and, rearing for that documentary to come out and that sort of thing. So we'll send them there.
Yeah, that sounds great. Actually, just reminds me, I'll try and put the trailer on the website as well, so people actually get a glimpse of what's coming.
Please do. Yeah, I talked about that earlier, and I'm sure people, I've been sharing that around, so it'd be great to see that there.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Murray, for the time today. Really appreciate the conversation, and it's fascinating what you're working on, and hopefully, I know that people are going to be fascinated by their conversation today, so thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to help me spread the word. So yeah, really appreciate it.
Right on.